Presswood. I'm the president of the Ward 8 Democrats, and I'm joined once again by my friend and colleague Marcus Batchelor, who is the chair of the Membership and Voter Outreach Committee for the Ward 8 Democrats. It's the Attorney General race. You have a lot of attention on this race because former council member, or current council member, I should say, Kenya McDuffie was disqualified by a technicality, which says that anyone who's running for AG has to be actively engaged in the practice of law. 3 candidates remain, though. Brian Schwab, who was endorsed by outgoing Attorney General Carl Racine. Ryan Jones, a DC native guy who has his own law practice. He also won the Ward 8 straw poll. And then also Bruce Spiver, who is a civil rights attorney who launched the effort to disqualify Kenya McDuffie. There's a lot of opinions on this. Yeah. How do you think this is going to shape up?
Well, for sure, I think Councilmember McDuffie's exit from the race, I think, blew the race wide open. And I think, it's a big choice for district voters. We've had 2 terms of an elected attorney general in the office, and so much of what the office has done and the way people see it is really quintessentially about the man who's held it, which has been Carl Racine. So electing our second attorney general is a really important race. And yeah, I think it's going to be as close as we might anticipate. Our straw poll was very close. There were a lot of strong opinions on either side, but I think, Councilmember McDuffie still holds an outsized presence in people's minds when it comes to this race. So I think how some of his supporters gravitate will, I think, determine some of candidates' success.
Good point there. Well, all right. Thank you, Marcus, so much for your insights. And we want you to now see for yourself how these candidates answer questions from Ward 8 voters and from Ward 8 residents. Feel free to post your comments or live tweet the event using the hashtag Ward 8 Votes. We'll be there live tweeting with you as well. And so on behalf of all of us here at the Ward 8 Democrats, we want to thank you for joining us. And now our encore presentation of the Candidates Forum for DC Shadow Representative, Attorney General, and Mayor.
I just want to welcome you officially to the Ward 8 Democrats public meeting for May 2022. I'm Troy Dante Presswood. I'm the president of the Ward 8 Democrats, and I'm officially calling our meeting to order. I want to thank all of you for being here with us today in person. And I want to thank also our friends who are joining us via the live stream. We are here at Matthews Memorial Baptist Church, and we're really glad that you're here, and we're really, we want you to share on social, either on Facebook or Twitter or Instagram, that you are here at Matthews Memorial Baptist Church and that you are here at the Ward 8 Democrats Forum. You can use the hashtag Ward 8 Dems or the hashtag Ward 8 Votes so others don't miss it. Before we go on, we want to take up this opportunity to offer a moment of silence. We know that we have lost loved ones. Some of us are here today with heavy hearts, and so we know that some have lost loved ones from disease and cancer, perhaps COVID, or either community violence. We also remember those who are lost here as well as in battlefields across the country and across the world. So if you'll join me for a brief moment of silence for those that we've lost. Thank you. Before we go further, I want to introduce, as you know, we are here, as I said, at Matthews Memorial Baptist Church, and the shepherd of this wonderful church is here with us today to bring greetings on behalf of the church. So will you help me welcome Reverend Dr. Joseph D. Turner.
Good morning. I am Pastor Joe Turner, and we are here at Matthews, where we are people sharing the good news of Jesus Christ to transform unbelievers to committed disciples. And if perhaps you have not come to know that, we're here to explain it and express it. This is a place of diversity, equity, and inclusion, and we're happy to have those who will be sharing on the panel, and we pray that as you share, that all will be included. There'll be a level of equity, and there'll be a letter of truth that comes forth. Thank you so much for coming. You're absolutely welcome. And again, we say welcome.
Thank you so much, Pastor, and thank you to all of the volunteers who have been tremendously helpful here at Matthews Memorial Baptist Church. And so we'll name those individuals a little bit later in our program, but I just wanted to just thank you and thank them personally and publicly for their support. Hey, we are being co-sponsored by the DC Democratic Party, and joining us today is the actual chairman of the DC Democratic Party. He is also a Ward 8 resident. If you will help me welcome Charles Wilson, chair of the DC Democratic State Committee.
Thank you, Troy, and good morning, Ward 8 Democrats. Good morning. Good afternoon. Good afternoon. I'm excited to be here. Of course, I am also a Ward 8 Democrat, living right down the street in Anacostia. But I want to say, first of all, everybody, we really should give a round of applause to the entire executive committee of the Ward 8 Democrats. Yes, because one, this is a 100% volunteer organization, and every member of this executive committee works really, really hard to be able to engage Ward 8 voters on the political process. So it's always good to say thank you. We appreciate the work that you do because sometimes this is a thankless job, and I know they work really hard. So I also want to bring greetings on behalf of the entire DC Democratic State Committee. After this, I really want to encourage you. One, yes, listen to the great conversations that you're going to have today about how we improve the quality of life in the District of Columbia and how we get statehood. But I encourage all of you to get involved with the Ward 8 Democrats. If not the Ward 8 Democrats, get involved with your community and civic association because at the end of the day, we can elect who we want to elect. But the only way our neighborhoods become better, our communities become better, our schools become better, our streets become safer is when you get involved in the process. So enjoy today's discussions and make sure you get involved. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Chairman Wilson, and thank you again to the DC Democratic State Committee, the DC Democratic Party, really, for their support and sponsorship of today's forum. Okay, in keeping with our voter education mission, we are pleased to welcome you online and those of you who have joined us live here in person for our final forum for U.S. Representative, D.C. Attorney General, and Mayor. Now, we held our last forum last month for Delegate to Congress, at-large council member, and council chair. If you didn't see that, check out our website, check out our social media platform. You can go back and watch that online. It was, I think we have over 1,000 views online, so you can go back and watch it. Check us out on Facebook and, of course, on our website at ward8dems.com. Today is your opportunity to hear directly from Democratic candidates vying for our support for these important offices. We will explore their records, their ideas, policy proposals, and vision for our ward, district, and the nation. We've asked all the campaigns that you will see represented today to partner with us to support our Get Out the Vote efforts here in Ward 8. And we want to publicly thank the campaigns of Oye Awolowo, Linda Gray, Brian Spiva, Robert White, and Trayon White. You'll see their ads in the program book, or you will see their information on our marketing materials that you'll see on our website and on social this election season. So again, I want to thank Oye Awolowo, Linda Gray, Brian Spiva, Robert White, and Trayon White's campaigns for their support. All right, let's get this forum started. Now, Delia Gonçalves is a reporter and anchor at WUSA 9. She joined that team in 2010. She got her first break in business right here in Washington at the U.S. Senate Radio TV Gallery and at NBC Network News. She then left D.C. to pursue her on-camera reporting endeavors, which then took her back to her native New England. Delia spent 5 years crisscrossing the region, working at several stations in Massachusetts and Rhode Island. During that time, she had the privilege of covering a number of national stories, including the station nightclub fire in Rhode Island that claimed 100 lives, and the historic vote on gay marriage in Boston, the first vote of its kind in the country. Thank you. Thank you. All right, for those watching online, we just had some folks talking. We had to get them straight. All right, so before returning to the nation's capital, Delia spent 4 years in Baltimore, where she was named Baltimore's best reporter in 2009. Among her most memorable stories in the Charm City was Delia's profile of a woman and her daughter living in a home without electricity or running water. But that reporting got her safer shelter in the end. Her reporting on the homeless here in DC has helped people get off the streets and reunite families. She has a passion about reporting facts, challenging the status quo, and telling compelling stories at the heart of our community. Delia is a first-generation Cape Verdean American born in New Bedford, Massachusetts, of immigrant parents who taught her the invaluable lessons of faith, hard work, and perseverance. And she lives east of the river with a husband and 3 daughters. So will you please welcome our moderator for the next 2 forums, Delia Gonçalves.
Troy's a bit taller than I am. I have to bring that down. Thank you, Troy, for that introduction. It's always interesting to hear your own bio read from someone else. Most importantly, I love this community, and I love elevating our stories. And I love seeing a community at work, and this is what we have today. It's a great day in Ward 8. Outside, downtown Anacostia is buzzing, and this historic church is buzzing as well. A great day of community where folks are being active, civic members of their neighborhood, and engaged participants, and really invested in the future. So I thank all of you and all of you online for investing into the future of this community and investing a portion of your afternoon. So let's get right to it, and let's meet our candidates. So before we get into that, a little housekeeping. So here's how we will proceed with today's forum. We'll engage in 2 different conversations. Of course, we already had one debate earlier today. DC Attorney General is currently going to happen, and then Mayor. So our aim is to open the candidates up to learn more about their policy proposals and visions for Ward 8 and the district as a whole. Each conversation will last about an hour and will be debate style. I'll ask a few questions, but really this is all about you and for you. So we want to have a discussion. We want to open this up to the community. So a lot of you received index cards when you came in. Hopefully you wrote down some questions. And folks online, you can feed your questions in through the chat and use the hashtag Ward 8 votes, and we will monitor the chat and try to get to as many community questions as possible. So here's how this round will go. Each candidate will be given 1 minute for an opening statement. We'll start with 1 minute responses. As we move closer to the end of our debate, we'll shorten up the responses to about 30 seconds. We will try to have a rapid fire question period with short yes or no responses based on the questions that we receive, and any necessary rebuttals will be given 30 seconds. So candidates, if I know you are no stranger to this, if you are named directly in a response, you will have 30 seconds to rebut. So let's meet our candidates. Brian Schwab, Ryan Jones, and Bruce Spiva. If you gentlemen can please join us on the stage. Round of applause for our candidates. Thanks for being here. Oh, name tags, yes. So Ryan Jones to my immediate right, Brian Schwab in the middle, and Bruce Spiva at the far end. The DC Attorney General is the chief legal officer of the District of Columbia. The Attorney General enforces the laws of the district, defends and provides legal advice to the district government agencies, and also protects the interests of the district residents. The Attorney General is elected to a 4-year term every non-presidential election year. We have 3 candidates running for the open seat being vacated by current Attorney General Karl Racine after he decided not to seek re-election. So, our candidates, Ryan Jones, Brian Schwab, and Bruce Spiva. Each will have 1 minute for opening statements, and then we will go into our debate. So let's get right into it with our opening statements. I will start with Mr. Jones.
Good afternoon, everyone. Can you hear me?
There it is.
Good afternoon, everyone. Can you hear me now? Hope you're all doing well. I'm excited to be here and share my vision for Washington, D.C. to ensure that we're all enjoying a brighter future here. I'm a native Washingtonian. I grew up in Northwest. I've spent time playing at Berry Farms, where I was the first ever Rookie of the Year, right down the street. I care very much about this city. I know that we are in great, crucial times where we have an opportunity to improve the city to ensure that we all have a brighter future. I want to put new solutions in place to cure old problems. We have historic issues that continue to plague us, and we need to put things in place to allow us to get over them, not for right now, but many years to come. I look forward to our discussion. I have friends here that I'd like to mention. Jock Patterson, who endorsed me. I'm truly grateful. I have other friends supporting me, and I look forward to what we have to talk about for the rest of the day. And I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you very much. And keep in mind, everyone, I think you do have to turn your microphone on, and we do have a timer who's doing a great job with keeping everyone on task. If you can just keep in mind that we do have a schedule to follow. Mr. Schwab, 1 minute.
Well, thank you. It's nice to be here. I'm Brian Schwab. I'm a third-generation Washingtonian. My mother was born here, my grandfather. My 3 daughters are fourth-generation Washingtonians. I love this city. It's been a wonderful place to live and to work and to raise a family. I got a lot of good advice from my dad before he passed away, and one piece of advice is that God gives us 2 ears and 1 mouth for a reason. We all got to try to listen twice as much as we talk, and that's what I've been doing my whole life. My life as a lawyer and my last 6 months as a candidate. I'm a first-time candidate. And what I hear from people around the city is that they love Washington, they're proud of it. We're a city abundant in resource. What we don't have a problem with is having enough resources in DC. What we have a problem with is we don't share the resources and the opportunities that those resources allow for fairly and equally everywhere. The single most important tool we have in our toolbox is the law. And putting the law in the hands of the right lawyers to address that equity gap is why I'm running. It's what I'm going to do every day as your next Attorney General, making sure we're working as hard as we can to make the city as it is closer to the way the city as it should be.
Thank you, Mr. Schwab. Mr. Spiva, 1 minute.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Ward 8. My name is Bruce Spiva, and I'm running for DC Attorney General. You know, I stand on the shoulders of my late father and my mother, who both grew up in the Jim Crow era South. And both of them were the first in their families who were able to get a higher education. And both went on to lives of service for others. My dad graduated from Tennessee State in 1954, the year of the Brown decision. And he had a strong belief in the power of the law to change our lives for the better. He's the one who inspired me to go into the law. He's the one who instilled in me a sense of courage and duty to fight for change. And that's what I've tried to do these last 30 years that I've been practicing law, fighting for civil rights, fighting for voting rights, fighting for consumer protection and for antitrust enforcement. And that's why I want to be your Attorney General. I want to use the time that I have left to live up to my father's legacy, to fight for everyday people, particularly those who've been left out and left behind. I look forward to your questions. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Let's get right into it. This is a Ward 8 crowd. We are speaking directly to the needs of the Ward 8 community. So our first question, in your own words, how do Ward 8 residents directly benefit from the Attorney General role, given the more critical and nuanced needs of these residents? How would we benefit under your leadership, and I'm going to start with the same order that we did. So, Mr. Jones, how would we benefit Ward 8 residents specifically from your leadership?
Yes. So we look at housing issues, we look at opportunities for people to have employment opportunities, and as Attorney General, you can step into housing matters and you can litigate on behalf of the residents who need it the most. I believe that you go into courtrooms, you step in front of the agencies, and you ensure justice is occurring on behalf of the residents. This is not something that's easy, but these are complex things that you need a sharp legal mind in order to evaluate. I want to bring a fresh new look and create the solutions that we actually want. I'm outside talking to residents and I hear what's necessary. I hear what their requests are. And it just takes the political will and the legal force to step out and fight on behalf of these residents. They're asking for something, you become their attorney. That's what the Attorney General should do for residents in Washington, D.C., but especially here in Ward 8. And I want to do that.
Thank you. Mr. Schwab, same question. How will folks here in Ward 8, our neighbors, benefit from your leadership?
I hope I'm not offending anybody by not standing up. I can stand up. I can listen. This is the most important thing an Attorney General does, is listen. Not to come into Ward 8 or Ward 7 or anywhere else and tell you what you need. It's to listen and to have relationships within a robust community engagement arm in the Attorney General's office so that the AG is in the neighborhoods, listening and learning. What I've learned about during the course of this campaign is that we have barriers to entry in certain communities. We could talk about the history behind that. We know that. Years of racism both in our city and in our country. But those barriers to entry prevent things like building wealth through the ownership of a business, building wealth through the ownership of a home, being susceptible to consumer protection scams that are too often targeting homeowners and seniors on this side of the river. The Attorney General needs to be vigilant in fighting back against that, because if we do want the equitable city that we all want, the law has to be put to work to do it. And the only way it can work from an Attorney General is to be in community, listening and understanding. That's where the cases are going to be made. That's where we can push the information out to the community and where people can see the trends and can help to protect themselves so that the AG doesn't have to protect after the fact.
Thank you, Mr. Schwab. Same question, Mr. Spiva. How would folks here in Ward 8 directly benefit from your leadership?
Thank you. Well, I've been talking to a lot of residents of Ward 8 and Ward 7, communities east of the river, and what I'm hearing is the challenges that folks are facing are housing instability, gentrification, and the effects of that on folks who've been here a long time, criminal justice and criminal justice reform, and education, of course. And these are the types of fights that I've been engaging in my entire career. I fought for low-income residents in Columbia Heights who were pushed out of their housing, Latino, African-American, and Asian folks. Some of them were riding around on city buses with children at night, looking for a place to stay. Well, the reason I want to be Attorney General is I want to use the power of the law to fight for the tenants so that we force the slumlords to fix up their buildings, not allow them or the district itself to push the tenants out of their housing. And there are many other ways that the AG's office can affect the lives of people here in Ward 8 along those critical issues.
Thank you, Mr. Spiva. Why don't you keep standing? Because I have a question right on that topic. Since you talked about home ownerships and landlords and keeping people in their homes, we were given a question, and I have to preface, these questions are coming from our community. These were registered questions that are coming directly and speak to their needs and desires. And this is a question that is very timely and speaks on what you were just discussing. I was locked out, then evicted in December 2021. The landlord was given funds on my behalf. The property manager and their lawyer told the owner to give me the keys back, but he refused. Will you prosecute these owners? P.S. I had a newborn son, and this is thank you signed a Ward 8 resident. You may not be able to speak specifically to this case, but we do know that so many of our neighbors are living in desperate and dire unhabitable situations from these landlords who are profiting off their backs? What will you do to not only maybe address this particular situation, but to make sure people stay in their homes and have a safe and healthy home to stay in, and landlords don't take advantage of them?
Yes, thank you for the question, and I'll be honest, it makes me angry to my core when I hear something like that. That was the kind of anger that I felt, walking the blocks and talking to folks in Columbia Heights who had the same thing happen to them. And I can assure you, one, that people like that will have a friend in the Attorney General's office, again, trying to use the law to help the tenants, to help the people, not on the side of the slumlords. And what we're going to try to do is we're going to go after those repeat actors who keep using those same techniques to try to push the low-income folks out of their housing and make way for high-end condos. We're going to put those, thank you, we're going to put those landlords into receivership if we have to and make the repairs ourselves. And we'll force them to sell their buildings to someone who will keep it up for the people. I can't promise that I can solve every problem in every situation like that, but I can promise you that I will fight for you every day. Thank you.
Mr. Schwab, same question. What will you do about what people call and describe as deadbeat landlords taking advantage of our residents, our neighbors? And in this case, this landlord was told by the lawyer to give the keys back and refused to do so.
Yeah, the first case I ever tried when I was a second-year law student was a woman with 2 young babies. I'll never forget Sandra Andujar and her 2 young kids being threatened with eviction in the middle of the winter in Boston into the cold. And I saw firsthand what it meant for an advocate to stand up, to go to court and prevent injustices like that from happening. And you are right, these things happen way, way too frequently in our city. We have to understand what are some of the root causes as to why we're seeing the affordable housing crisis in our city and why we're seeing landlords behave in a way that is unlawful. As your AG, it's important to make sure that the law is rigorously enforced because that's the law. We have good housing laws in the District of Columbia. We need to enforce them with lawyers who are smart and know how to put the law to work. We also know about the basic human dignity of living in a place that's warm and safe. It's a basic human right. But it's also critical for us, if we want to work our way out of the affordable housing crisis in our city, to make sure we don't allow units of housing to fall out of the housing stock. And that's why an aggressive AG protecting the existing housing stock is critical, and that's something I will lean into as your next AG.
Mr. Schwab, thank you. Mr. Jones, same question. 1 minute.
In the practice of law, you have to analyze facts. You find your issues, and you step out zealously, and you fight on behalf of your clients. I've been doing that. I've started out in landlord-tenant, and I've seen tons of cases just like this. I have a present matter pending right now with a property not too far from here where a tenant is fighting to stay. The tenant's not only fighting to stay, but fighting to purchase that property, and we're in tough negotiations right now. And these are the types of things I believe an attorney general can step up to the plate and address. What they can do is make it sure that people aren't comfortable putting these policies in place and continually finding ways to force folks out, trying to find a way to maximize their dollar while not caring about what happens to the person on the other side. After learning everything you need to know about the practice of law, who you are becomes more important. What types of issues are you fighting? What's your value system? That's what matters. And I'm saying I have the values. I know what needs to be done, and I'll take these fights on.
Thank you. Next question, again from our community members. If implemented correctly, community policing involves MPD very little. Residents do not feel protected in this endeavor. How will you improve the community's involvement in policing neighborhoods when they do not feel safe sharing information or camera footage from home security systems? We hear it all the time. We need neighbors to come forward and help the police. The police can't do it alone. But if the folks don't trust the police, then it's very difficult to come forward if they fear retribution and retaliation. So I will start with Mr. Jones. How would you improve community relations with police so that the community is more willing to share information and work as partners?
I think everyone's aware of the Cure the Streets program, right? Yes? All right. So I believe Cure the Streets can be used as a way to help with policing in our city. I think it's a way to allow folks to
Go ahead.
The thought is to use Cure the Streets to partner with police, repair the relationships that we've had. It's a historic issue. And we need to find ways to step to the plate differently. These are creative ways to do it. We're not saying, hey, look, you nonprofit group, you go figure out what's happening in the problem in the streets. But you got to work with the people that are given the authority to make these decisions. And we have to cure and repair relationships. And this is a long problem that we have. This is a problem that requires a lot of time to resolve, but we have to start. And it's right now that we have to do it. Those would be something, that's something that I would do. Also, going into the police force and resolving the issues there that create the historic problems that we've had between the community and the police in general.
Thank you. Mr. Schwab, same question. How would you improve community relations?
Well, it is essential for the safety of our city and the community relations that there be a better level of trust between the MPD and communities, particularly communities here in Ward 8. The police have to be part of an overall solution, but we need to be thinking about how police are being used. We too often put police into positions where they're not well trained or well expected to do the work. Certain crises better call out for a mental health professional or domestic violence professionals, or perhaps substance abuse professionals who we can partner with our police, or better yet, can have those types of professionals called to a crisis instead of the police. But here's one of the key things I'm going to do as AG, because the AG's office represents the MPD along with lots of other agencies. We've got to try to create a greater sense of transparency from our police department. We need to see the data on stops, on seizures, on what's happening, not just to make sure the work is being done in a constitutional and lawful way, but we want to know, is it effective? Is it working to help us become a safer community? Only by greater transparency from the MPD can the community start to get a level of trust, and it happens in small steps along the way, but steps on trust build on other steps.
Thank you, Mr. Schwab. Mr. Spiva, same question.
Thank you. We've had a recent report on improvements to the policing, and we need to not let that sit on the shelf and gather dust. We need to start implementing some of those suggestions. I also think that there are situations now where the police are called upon to respond to what are actually behavioral health issues, mental health issues, that they are not trained to solve. And so we need to expand our program of mental health providers who can actually provide the response in that situation, or have a co-response in a situation where it's violence threatened. I've also heard from members of the community who said that they need more police in their neighborhood. And I hear them. And I think we need to listen to them. And we need to make sure the police are properly trained and that they're respecting the community and that they are truly in partnership with the community. But I don't want to come in here, from out of the ward and say, hey, we need to get rid of the police, when I know there are members of this community who want the police and need the police in their community. Thank you.
Thank you. Question from our audience here, following up on policing, and it's an easy one and an impactful one. Do you support the mayor's initiative in hiring more police officers? Mr. Jones, I'll start with you.
I've said the people in power currently have the best understanding of what's necessary. We're looking at hiring 3,500 more police officers right now. That's to cover any attrition that's happening in the profession of policing, which is ramped up given the heightened state of conflict that we are all talking about trying to resolve between police officers and the community that they serve. And I look at what's being done as a way to as an opportunity to hire from Washington, D.C. Hire people from right here in the neighborhoods, the people that know who they will be policing, so that they have an opportunity to work collaboratively, and that policing can, the marred history of conflict between police and those in the community can resolve when it's somebody that have known for a very long time. You have a different interaction with them. And I would support hiring from in Washington, D.C. You get cruisers on the street, you deter crimes that way, and that could be a potential resolution for what's going on right now.
Thank you. Mr. Schwab, same question. Do you support hiring more police officers?
So we had a recent call for an audit of our MPD because we have the largest number of police officers per capita of any urban setting anywhere in the country. Now, we have some unique aspects of Washington because we're a county, we're a state, and we're a city all at the same time. And there are some reasons why we may have more police than any other area. But we need to understand, are our police force and the efficiencies that we expect of an agency being met? There was supposed to be an audit done 3 or 4 years ago to answer that question. I believe in data. I believe trying to understand before you answer the question whether you need more police or less, are our police right now working as efficiently as they can? Let's be straight. It's been a hard time to be a police officer. We have attrition. We have a lot of people who've left the police force, just like a lot of employment all over the country. We do have to be mindful of that because when workforces are attrition and people are working overtime and strained, it becomes a lot harder to do the hard work of any agency like the police. But I'd like to see that analysis done as to whether or not our MPD is as efficient as it can or should be before I answer a question about whether we need more or less.
Yeah, I tend to agree with Attorney Schwab that we need an audit, I think, to answer this question. I think it's an arbitrary question, though. I'm not faulting your question, but it's an arbitrary issue. Should the number be X versus Y, particularly without that kind of a look? But also, sure, if response times are going down, yes, or going up, then yes, that would tell you need more police. But we need to do other things as well. We need to be making sure that we're providing the types of mental health counseling that keeps people from getting into trouble in the first place, substance abuse counseling, economic opportunity, addressing housing instability. And so I think it's a false choice between police on the one hand and public safety on the other hand. I think you need both in order to achieve public safety. The last thing I'll say is that we incarcerate more people in this country, 6 times more than any other Western democracy, and yet we're less safe. So ultimately, the only way to achieve a solution is to do these other things as well. Thank you.
Thank you. These, again, are questions coming from our community members and our audience members. And in the same vein, I do want to talk a bit more just about police. Same audience member asked, do you support police in our schools, and do you support offering incentives for more officers to join the force? So 1, do you support police in our schools, and do you support adding incentives? And let's just do this as a rapid fire. I think we could answer those questions in a fairly short 30-second response. I'll start with you, Mr. Spiva. Do you support police in our schools? And do you support offering incentives for folks to join MPD, such as housing supplements and signing bonuses? And I'll give you 30 seconds each to answer those questions.
I think with the question of police in schools, our ultimate goal ought to be that we don't need police in schools. I do think it's not a one-size-fits-all solution, that this ought to be community-based. The community and the school ought to have the option, if they feel the need, to have police in their schools, because I have talked to people who feel that way. But we also have to make sure that the police are trained correctly so they aren't traumatizing kids by their presence in the schools. And with respect to, can you remind me the second question?
The second question was incentives for folks to join MPD.
I support
and
that.
I'll give you 15 out of.
I'll give you a short answer. Yes.
Okay, sounds good. It was a 2-part question. 30 seconds is a little tight. So we'll give you 40-ish or so, okay? I'll wrap you up when I see you
When I need you.
wandering, when you need me. Go ahead, question number, do you support hiring more police officers in the schools, and how about incentives?
Look, I think it's really hard to be a high schooler in the best of circumstances or a middle schooler. We all maybe remember those days, how hard it is. And being in fear on the way to school or being in fear in school is it's going to make it even harder to be a student. That's the reality. We also have a reality that our current DC Council has already decided that we are going to step down the number of resource officers and police in school. In fact, we're going to be down to 0. We're going to be down to 0 in 5 years, and that's the voice of our community. I think what we really need to do is focus on the root causes of why kids are either falling out of school or falling into trouble at school. instead of always responding with more police, more security officers, and tamping down kids. Kids shouldn't feel like they're criminals walking into a school. That deters the ability to learn. As far as incentives, I think police officers, as well as mental health professionals, nurses, we need more working folks to be able to afford to live in our city. And if we got to give incentives, not just to police, but to mental health therapists and teachers and nurses, then yes, I think we should do that.
Okay, that's your time. Thank you. Mr. Jones, same two questions.
I say these are our children that we're sending to and from school that we have to keep safe. And what does that look like? It's not a one-size-fits-all solution, and people need to feel safe, and sometimes having a police officer there makes people feel safe. On the other side of the token is having a police officer in a school that then disturbs the children and prevents them from having a good learning situation that puts them on a track to have a better life. And I think that's what we all want. So we have to make smart decisions over and over and do hard work. Put your hands into the soil, figure it out. Figure out what these communities need and not come with answers, but come with answers that work for the questions that you guys have for us. We're here to serve you. If this is what you need, this is what we will give you, okay? Should we incentivize police to be hired here in Washington, D.C.? Yes.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate the lively discussion, and we all want you to give us your feedback. But let's respect the candidates who are here so we can all hear their answers to these very important questions that all of you do have. So let's move on with a question here. What responsibility should parents bear when their children commit serious and/or violent crimes such as drug distribution, carjacking, violent assaults, attempted murder, etc.? For example, if a child is engaged in a drug trade and the parents accept monetary or other benefits from the child knowing the juvenile is not gainfully employed or not able to otherwise afford such items, will you hold adults responsible who use juveniles in the furtherance of criminal activity? We saw this on a national scale where in one case when there was a school shooting, the parents were held responsible, and that was unprecedented at the point, right, at the time. So what would you do for parents who are engaging in some ways with their children's criminal activity? And we've seen these youth carjackings on the rise, and we're about to get into summer, so we need some real solutions. I'll start with Mr. Spiva.
Well, short answer on when the parents are actually involved in the criminal activity, they should be prosecuted and they should go to jail. Now, I do want to make sure everybody knows that the AG's office does not have control over adult felony prosecutions. I think it should. That will be a goal of mine, along with statehood, by the way. I'm a longtime fighter for DC statehood. We should control prosecution of all of our local felonies, but all of our local crimes. I think, though, the focus when we're talking about our children and serious crimes is how do we keep them from getting into that kind of trouble in the first place, providing all those kinds of wraparound services, and if they do, making sure that in the long term we get them back on the right track. And so that may mean a system where we are able to hold them longer and provide them those wraparound services and have appropriate accountability. Not in an adult prison, let me emphasize, but where we hold them longer than we can now. And that may require some legislation, but that's something that I'm going to try to pursue to try to address this. I think that's where our focus ought to be. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Schwab, same question. What responsibility should parents bear, and how would you hold them accountable?
There's no question that oftentimes it's a parent or a guardian or an older sibling or an uncle or an aunt that first sees the warning signs in a young person. And we do want to make sure that everybody in our community is engaged. We don't want to have a prosecutor, an AG, or a U.S. attorney deal with it. We don't want the police to have to deal with it. We obviously would like the family and the community to deal with it. There was a time, I remember when I was getting out of line, somebody in the community would grab my ear and say, "You got to get back in line." We are in this together. I don't like the idea of criminalizing parenting. It is already very, very hard for so many people to raise their kids, to raise their grandkids, to start thinking about criminalizing that hard work. We need to be mindful, though, for example, in our juvenile justice system now, there are orders that come down when somebody gets into trouble that requires the parents to engage. There's a court order that says, Mom, Dad, you need to be involved in your kids' work, school, whatever it is. And when parents don't follow the rules of a court and they're in contempt of a court, of course, I think we have to hold them accountable. But I don't like the idea of broadly criminalizing parenting or grandparenting, uncling, and aunting.
Thank you. Mr. Jones. Same question, 1 minute.
Out getting petition signatures, somebody confronted me and said, this is what you ought to do. I'm listening to that person for the very first time, hearing them say, hold the parents accountable. They know better than anyone else that they don't have a job, they can't afford this stuff that they are bringing into the homes, and they're also benefiting from it. So you hold them accountable so you deter these crimes from happening, which are affecting our communities. This is what I heard, right? And I hear my colleagues say important things that I agree with, and how we hold people accountable to make sure our cities are safe is something that we have to revitalize. And that's why you're asking us to step to the plate and figure it out for you. Half of the room is agreeing that you should hold parents accountable, while the other half is saying that's nonsense. How do we keep our cities safe? How do we hold the actors accountable? And how do we put people on a track to be productive members of society? There's a design feature that we're all suffering with, many of us here, and we have to eradicate that so we're not talking about this. And that's why I'm running.
Thank you. There was a question from the audience referring to the recent report of results concerning police. What's the date and who completed it? It was the Police Reform Committee. The commission released, I think, 90 recommendations or so to reimagine policing, and this was after the death of George Floyd. So it's online. The full report is there at the DC Council. You can look that up. Police Reform Commission, full report, DC Council. You can look at all the recommendations. That was released April 2021. Let's continue talking about our young people. And this is a very crucial issue that's happening here, especially, unfortunately, in communities here in Ward 8. How would you help save the youth from the rapid increase of opioid overdoses in our community? Mr. Jones, I'll start with you.
You know, this is a big problem. Why are folks needing to use drugs in the first place? Okay? Then when they are using drugs, are we doing everything that we can to keep them safe? You hear about these safe use sites. We hear about other things that are creative measures in order to stem or make sure that people aren't dying and overdosing. But we have people selling drugs. They're not scientists. They don't know what they're giving folks. They're just trying to make some money. It's an awful design that's been created, which is now being exacerbated, and it's leaving people dead. If they're dying from the drugs, they're dying from the gun violence that enforces the sale of drugs. They're dying from being put in jail because they sold drugs. And we're all dealing with the effects of it, all of us. And it doesn't just stay here in one area. It spreads out throughout the city. So until we start putting programs in place and changing the way institutions operate, you're going to continue to see these problems, and us as attorney generals aren't going to be the ones that fix it. So you have to try to meet people where they are and create the solutions now, but then make sure that they're not happening in years to come.
Thank you. That's your time. Same question, Mr. Schwab.
Look, we all see it in the paper. The overdoses from fentanyl is the largest killer of young people, 15 to 34 right now. That stat is off the charts. The amount of fentanyl that somebody has to put in their body to overdose is infinitesimally small. It's rampant. It's available on the streets. And part of that is a repeat of what we see over and over again. We talk about the crack epidemic. We talk about the guns epidemic. Now we're going to hear about the opioid epidemic. And we recycle the kinds of arguments that are too often law and order. Law is going to arrest people, put people in jail, stamp this stuff out, and it doesn't work. We always have to go back to what are the root causes of why these types of behaviors are happening. Why are people using drugs? Why are the drugs available? And get to those root causes. For me, I'm never going to give up on kids in DC. One of the greatest privileges of being the Attorney General is not to wait for kids to get in trouble so you can prosecute them, but to advocate for kids a lot farther down the road. And this epidemic of fentanyl and opioids is what is the next great crisis for our kids. And we got to all be in it together. If I told you as AG I could solve it, you guys, nobody should vote for me if I told you that. We got to all be in it together.
Okay, that's your time. Thank you. Mr. Spiva, same question, and you have 1 minute.
Sure. You know, we have a nationwide substance abuse crisis in this country, and we certainly feel the effects here in DC as well. But it's not new. Isn't it interesting that folks have started to notice deaths from substance abuse, the opioid crisis, when it came to Appalachia, where the white folks were dying of it as well? All of a sudden, people are recognizing that we need to actually fully treat substance abuse. All of a sudden, folks are recognizing that we need to have broad, available mental health counseling. And what else do we need? We need to deal with housing instability. We need to deal with economic insecurity. We need to deal with our education system and the hopelessness that too often flows from that. These are hard issues. They're complicated issues. They're deep problems, and they affect our community. But that's the way we ultimately solve it. We have to address those root causes of this drug problem. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so we have about 3 minutes left in our debate before we head over to closing remarks. So I want to go to a question that we received from an online audience member. Would you require your attorneys to participate in restorative programs? And we'll start with, I'll switch it up. We'll start with Mr. Schwab.
You got a minute for this or 30 seconds?
1 whole minute.
60 seconds. All right. We should be very proud for a lot of reasons of our current Attorney General's office. And one of the reasons we should be proud of it is we are the only prosecutor's office in the country that has a restorative justice program in the office of the prosecutor. That is very, very important because for so many reasons, our criminal justice system doesn't always work in resolving the hard issues that come to it. For example, when cases can't get made because the evidence is bad, the witnesses go bad, if you either are a prosecutor that says, I'm either going to prosecute or drop the case, you lose an opportunity for closure, for the agreement that can be reached through a restorative justice process. Too often, victims, families of violence are not given voice in our criminal justice system, particularly our juvenile justice system. Restorative justice allows victims and their families to have a voice, for people to get to an agreement as to what happened and how are we going to make sure it doesn't happen again, for real empathy to be shown and for an agreement to be reached, because that in the long run is what we want to do, is break cycles of trauma, retaliation, violence, trauma, retaliation, violence. And restorative justice is showing the promise of that in Washington. And I will look for ways to expand it to more violent crimes than the current low-level crimes it's being used in.
Thank you very much. Mr. Jones?
Can I have a question?
Sure. Would you require your attorneys to participate in restorative justice programs?
Absolutely. So a senior came to me. She said one of her neighbors walked up to her, knocked her down, and she suffered an injury. And now she's dealing with an assault matter, saying, how are you going to help me step to the plate, things of that nature. Now you're talking about a senior, somebody that's in their 70s. What would you want to have happen to that gentleman that knocked her over? What would be justice in that situation? What would you want to do? I don't have the answer, right? So a restorative justice program, you're not going to try to go and lock up a senior for knocking her down, but you can go into a restorative justice program like the one that's been set up and allow them to sit across the table from one another, agree and resolve their problem in an amicable way, right? She feels seen, she feels protected by her government, and this gentleman knows not to enter into that type of conduct again with any of their neighbors. That's one issue. But then we have young folks dealing with it. And we want to make sure that they don't re-engage in violence or, engage in carjackings. And we got to make deals so that they don't enter into this life of crime and find themselves on the margins of society. And now we're talking about all the previous questions happening again and how we're going to resolve that for them. So that's what the restorative justice program is all about, making sure that young folks aren't on the margins for the rest of their life.
Thank you, Mr. Jones. Mr. Spiva, restorative justice programs.
Yes, I support the program. I think it provides an opportunity in the appropriate cases for there to be healing by the victim. It's a victim-centered program. and at the same time, real reform by the person who committed the crime if they come to understand the damage that they've done, the injury they've done to the victim. They sit down together and meet. I think we got to be careful because there's some circumstances where we don't want to re-traumatize the victim. You might have a domestic violence situation where already you have difficulty actually bringing the perpetrator to justice because they have this psychological control over the victim. So we got to be careful. But in general, I think it's a very good program, and it's something that I would support. Thank you.
Thank you. Our last question combines a few issues here. One of my own question that I came with, and then some from the community members that I see. This race started with 4 candidates, and Kenyon McDuffie is no longer on the ballot. Ron Moten, who was a prominent business and community leader here in Ward 8, penned a post opinion calling the Attorney General race a state of emergency, and said that there should have been a little more interpretation into the law, allowing a DC native, a black son of DC, to serve and to run for his candidacy in his own city. So I'd like to take some time and give you each a minute to talk about how you think that move, that strategic move that occurred within this race, how do you think that's perceived by the community? And I'll start with Mr. Spiva.
Thank you for the question. I think the community is not a monolith. I've talked to many people about this. I've reached out to Councilmember McDuffie and many of his supporters, and I understand that he and many of his supporters are disappointed, and I understand that kind of frustration. I've lost cases before. I've had personal disappointments before, so I understand that. But I brought that challenge in good faith because I believed, although he's a dedicated public servant who's done a lot of good things on the council, that he didn't meet the minimum eligibility requirements. The Board of Elections and the Court of Appeals that heard it unanimously agreed with me. So now I'm moving on, and I want to tell you why I would make an extremely qualified person to hold this office based on my 30 years of service to the people, fighting for civil rights, voting rights, consumer protection. And that's the kind of experience that I'm going to bring to the job to try to make things better for folks who've been left out and left behind. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Spiva. Mr. Schwab, how do you think the removal of Kenyon McDuffie from the ballot is interpreted by these community members? What do you think it means?
Well, I'm a first-time candidate, and I had a conversation with my 3 daughters and my wife, Mickey, before I got into this race, and what we talked about was we wanted to lead a campaign and run a campaign consistent with my values, where we elevate, where we talk about issues, and we try to get away from the division that's too much a part of our political conversation. We have a huge competitive advantage in Washington, D.C. because we don't have the red versus blue problem that communities have across the country where they can't even get in a room and talk about things they disagree with. We don't have that problem. We do have divisions, though, in our city. And I think that when we are politicians and we're engaged in the process, we should be thinking about minimizing divisions and bringing us together. And I thought that the process was a divisive one. I was aware of the arguments. I exercised judgment in my campaign without knowing whether it was strategically in my interest, just like my decision to be a fair election candidate at the beginning of this race was not made with any sort of understanding as to what the tactics would be, but trying to do the right thing. I hope we can get past this. I hope that we can be a city that becomes united on issues because we need to be together to fight these really tough issues that affect all of us in Washington.
Thank you, Mr. Schwab. Mr. Jones.
This is a tough situation to address. It's very unfortunate what has occurred, and I'm very sorry for Kenyon and his supporters and the people who wanted to give him a shot to represent Washington, D.C. I look at my colleagues, a very sharp attorney, a very sharp attorney. These guys know the issues, and they can advocate zealously on your behalf just as he could. And they've stuck out here, and we have real problems that we're talking about. We have real issues to still resolve whether Kenyon McDuffie's on the ballot or not. And to sit back at home and be sad and disappointed is a mistake. You better step to the plate because this is the 3 people that are up here. And these are solid attorneys and they're good people at heart. He did what a lawyer did. And you have the opportunity to fight And that's what he revealed. And this is what we're dealing with now. So I would say, educate yourself, educate yourself, educate yourself. It's not a state of emergency. You have 3 quality attorneys before you, and you have a crucial decision to make by June 21st. All right? Now let's move forward.
Thank you. And with that, that closes out our debate. Give these candidates a round of applause. And so we will now offer a 1-minute closing remark to each of our candidates. And we will take a break. I know you've been sitting for a while, but if you can give us your attention for about 3 more minutes, that's all we need. If the audience can just quiet down and we can give our attention and respect to these candidates who've given their time and really answered some very difficult questions that I think were important to a lot of folks who are here. So Mr. Spiva, your 1-minute closing remark.
Thank you so much. You know, a great Washingtonian whose house is not too far from here, Frederick Douglass, once said that power concedes nothing without a demand. It never has, and it never will. When we see an injustice, we have a moral obligation not to walk away, but to fight to try to change it. That is the reason we were put on this earth. And that's why I've been fighting for 30 years for civil rights and voting rights, consumer protection. I want to fight for housing justice. I want to fight for criminal justice reform. I want to fight for consumer protection. I want to fight for environmental justice. These are not issues that just came along for me during this election season. These are the types of things that I've been fighting for and winning on behalf of the people for 30 years. So if you want a leader who is ready to walk up the rough side of the mountain for you and to inspire others to join us, choose me. I'm eager and ready to do the job. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Schwab. Folks, please, just a couple of more minutes, please. We need to move quickly so we can get to our mayoral debate. Mr. Schwab, you have the floor.
One thing I think everybody who lives in Washington should be proud of is the state of our current Attorney General's office. Under Carl Racine's leadership, the first independently elected AG in our city's history, we have an Attorney General's office that is a premier AG office, recognized across the country as one of the top state AGs. The level of talent, the level of hardworking professionals and lawyers that are working in that office fighting every day for us, we should feel good about that. I'm very, very proud that the 700 full-time equivalents and that $150 million budget a year, that office that serves all of us so well, its current leader, Carl Racine, has endorsed me as the next Attorney General. I'm also proud that the Attorney General before him, Irv Nathan, has also endorsed me. Those 2 gentlemen approach the job very differently. They may not agree on very much, but one thing they agree on is that the experience of lawyering for 30 years, trying everything from death penalty cases in Alabama to billion-dollar civil cases and everything in between, leading large teams of lawyers, hundreds of professionals, managing a large budget and coming in independent is critical to the job of the AG. It's a hard job. We've got hard questions before us, but we need somebody on day one who brings the skills, the experience, and the heart to fight for all of us in DC and our city, and I hope you'll get behind me. I hope I'll earn your support, and if you want to find out more about me, it's Brian with an I, FORDC.com, and thank you very, very much.
Thank you. Mr. Jones, your 1-minute closing remarks.
2020 revealed a lot of the problems that we have in our society. It highlighted all of them, and it exacerbated them. It hit the communities in harder ways than in others. And I decided we needed to step up to provide new leadership and provide new vision to cure these age-old problems. I know that we need to rewire a system in order to uplift and empower people. I put it right on the back of these shirts. And it's important that I say that because when I go in all of these courtrooms, I know what it's like. I've been in the Court of Appeals. I've been in federal district court. I've been in DC Superior, civil, criminal, landlord-tenant, small claims, been before the Office of Administrative Hearings, and being successful. I've been before the current Office of Attorney General, and I haven't lost. It's just a fact. And I came to this point to say I need to step up and help more people. That's why I'm running. I'm tired of seeing the things that we've seen throughout history. And if we don't have leaders that step up and make a change, it's not going to change. We need us to protect us. And that's why I'm running. I hope I can earn your vote and support and recognize that I'll stand to the plate for you every day and do just that. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Neighbors, another round of applause for our candidates for Attorney General here in the District of Columbia. Thank you.
Thank you. Please help me thank Delia Gonçalves. She's been an incredible, incredible moderator of these back-to-back debates. Okay, listen, folks, especially those of us who are online. Again, you will be able to vote in these 40 vote centers across the district during early vote period that runs June 10th through June 19th. And 90 vote centers will be open on Election Day, Tuesday, June 21st. In addition to those 40 vote centers, 90 vote centers will be open on Election Day, and 55 drop boxes will be open all across the city. You can vote at any of those locations. Take a look at these slides up here. You'll see the vote locations in Ward 8. Vote in those locations if you want to stay in the ward, but to be clear, you can vote anywhere in the city.